The Not So Perfect Pair by starcollectorsilas. Chapter 20. CHUUYA fell asleep some time after 3 a.m. The bruises that appeared on his skin and the sudden pains through his neck over the night didn't do anything to quell the increasing and sickening anxiety he was riddled with. But through all of it, he got up. He got off the couch, detangling from his place squashed between his mother and Koyo, and he brushed his teeth, then his hair, and got dressed, finding use for the choker Dazai had bought him for his birthday, carefully positioned over his neck to hide the blue lines. He just got ready as normal, quietly, slowly, numbly. But he was alive, and he wasn't sure if he could say the same for his soulmate. He left earlier than usual, breathing in deeply in the slightly chilly air, the breeze a relief, and instead of walking to school, he turned the opposite way, walking in the direction of Dazai's house. He stopped as he came to a small bridge over a river, a footpath, no cars nearby. It was quiet, the world seemingly asleep aside from him, the birds and the river the only things audible for once. He stood at the railing and crossed his arms, leaning his cheek on them, watching the water trickle over the rocks, down the curve of the earth, out to the sea eventually. The quiet was refreshing, a moment to himself with the morning sun warming his back through his shirt, his hair blowing in the breeze. He blinked lethargically, the sound of quiet footsteps making him raise his head, and Dazai stopped next to him, leaning his elbows on the railing as well, his hands dangling over the edge. They didn't say anything for a few seconds, and CHUUYA instead just looked at Dazai, who looked dead on his feet. He was pale, dark circles and red under eyes, his lips bitten so hard that there were red marks where his teeth had sunk in. CHUUYA was sure he didn't look much better, but Dazai managed to pull it off with a kind of grace you wouldn't expect from him, and CHUUYA was almost jealous of how effortlessly good he seemed to look, even while appearing half dead. "You look tired," CHUUYA said quietly, and Dazai turned to look at him, the sun catching his face, lighting his eyes to look almost red. "I feel it," Dazai responded, voice hoarse and scratchy, but he smiled slightly, looking at CHUUYA in the same light, the way his hair was messy despite his attempts to tame it, the way he rested his face on his arms, and the way his eyes were squinted slightly in the sun. CHUUYA paused, going quiet, debating his next words, looking at Dazai carefully, hair falling in his face. "My soulmate tried to kill himself again. I don't know if he's alive this time," he admitted quietly, the words like lead on his tongue, forcing him to choke around them. "He's alive," Dazai said, voice devoid of emotion, and he turned to look down at the water, eyes tracing a leaf from upstream as it floated along idly. "How do you know? What if he isn't?" CHUUYA asked, lifting his head, looking at Dazai with a hint of hope. "You wouldn't have the marks anymore. They would have disappeared within a few minutes," Dazai said, expression softening as he kept looking away, eyes distant, like he wasn't quite there, watching something else. CHUUYA felt some of the tension drop from his shoulders, but the look on Dazai's face didn't give him the reassurance he might have gotten if he looked more reassuring. Instead, Dazai just looked tired. "Something up?" CHUUYA asked cautiously, careful to not come off as pushy. Turns out he didn't need to do that, as Dazai just hummed and shrugged. Then his breath hitched and he winced at the movement. Quickly, before CHUUYA could ask, he spoke, avoiding another questions by answering CHUUYA's first one. "I'm just tired. Really tired. I just want to sleep until the summer." CHUUYA sighed. "Dazai, you said the same thing in February. It's May. It's pretty much the summer already." Dazai swallowed, looking down at his hands, chewing on his lips. "I know. Maybe until June. The holidays, you know. We can have week-long sleepovers and do stupid shit again." Dazai said quietly, not meeting CHUUYA's eyes. Despite the relatively clear sky, it started to rain, thin and light, but catching the sun and causing ripples in the water. "We can't sleep for a month," CHUUYA said, shifting his tone to something more firm. He pushed himself away from the railing, turning and facing the sun, shaking his head and tilting his face to the sun. He sighed in the warmth and closed his eyes for a moment. He heard a faint click, and when he turned around, Dazai was standing with his little digital camera pointed at CHUUYA. Dazai lowered it, checking the picture, and CHUUYA smiled, his cheeks going pink as he looked at the expression of concentration as Dazai analyzed the picture. "Hey," he started, and Dazai looked up again, still looking distinctly tired, and CHUUYA frowned a little. "On your birthday, we'll go get slushies or ice cream or something. Go sit outside the pretty library," he said, running through things they could do outside their usual. "We can find something worth being awake for." Dazai stared at CHUUYA, eyes glittering from something other than the light, and he cleared his throat. "That sounds alright." Suddenly, Dazai stepped forward, and CHUUYA was pulled into his arms. CHUUYA didn't hesitate in hugging him back, squeezing him tightly. Dazai was shaking slightly, and CHUUYA just rested his cheek on Dazai's shoulder, face turned into his neck, nose wrinkled at the strong smell of antiseptic. Then, Dazai pulled him down, and they were sitting on the little bridge, tucked in at the side and holding each other tightly in their arms. CHUUYA held out fistfuls of Dazai's shirt, and he closed his eyes tightly, and he whispered something against his neck. "We'll stay awake together, at least a little longer." He felt the motion of Dazai nodding and taking a shaky breath, his chest shuddering with the force of it. If they ended up being late to school, neither of them particularly cared. Rampo appeared out of nowhere, startling CHUUYA, who hid his surprised jump by rolling his eyes. "You need to stop sneaking up to people like that. You're gonna give someone a heart attack," CHUUYA said, sitting down in his usual lunch spot. "I don't think I will," Rampo responded, distracted, looking around. "Where's Dazai?" he asked, and CHUUYA raised an eyebrow, pointing in the direction of the school. "Speaking to our art teacher. His final isn't finished yet, and they're supposed to be submitted soon." Rampo hummed, furrowing his eyebrows, looking serious. "Something is wrong with him. What is it?" Rampo demanded to know, and CHUUYA looked at him, frowning. "What do you mean? Aside from his eating, all I can think of is he seems depressed as shit, But that's normal, I suppose, CHUUYA said, sitting up straight. Why? He asked, tone taking on a slightly more concerned hint. How's Oda doing? Rampo asked instead, sounding extremely worried. CHUUYA sighed and shrugged. I don't know. I didn't know I was supposed to be worrying about Dazai's brother. Yeah? Well, look at this, Rampo said, kneeling next to CHUUYA. He turned his phone around, opened on Facebook, and on a recommended post, in bold letters, there was an obituary. For Oda Sakonosuke. CHUUYA felt sick, leaning forward and taking Rampo's phone from his hand. His eyes narrowed in on the date of the funeral, clear on the post. May 14th. Dazai was off school that day. He said Elise got sick. CHUUYA said quietly, handing Rampo his phone back. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he tell anyone? Rampo corrected, frowning down at his phone. Nobody knew. Aside from you and I, still nobody knows. He probably didn't want anyone to worry. CHUUYA struggled for words for a second, feeling hurt and a little betrayed. But that's bullshit, he exclaimed. His brother, who I knew and my sister used to be good friends with, died, and he didn't think to tell me? Maybe invite us to the funeral? CHUUYA, I don't think it's particularly fair to... No! I think I have a right to be upset about that. He's not just not told me, he's lied to me, CHUUYA said, scowling. He's lied to all of us. That's what Dazai is, a liar, Rampo said blankly. CHUUYA scowled. Don't talk about him like that. Rampo scoffed and rolled his eyes. I'm not being malicious, I'm being factual. Dazai is a liar, not because he wants to be, but because of self-preservation. Rampo explained, plainly and blankly, as he properly sat down in front of CHUUYA. CHUUYA glowered, because deep down he knew Rampo was right. Dazai was a liar. Dazai got defensive. Dazai got avoidant. Still, CHUUYA couldn't help but feel betrayed, weirdly hurt over the realization Dazai hadn't told him. He had known Oda, viewed him as family for years when he and Koyo had been best friends. He felt so unbelievably crushed by the knowledge he had died. The point stands. Something is seriously wrong with Dazai this time. I don't know what, and it's driving me insane. Figure it out, Rampo asked, voice slightly pleading. Between us, we can work it out, find something to solve. He needs help. You're not stupid, CHUUYA. His dad has done something, I'm sure of it. CHUUYA felt guilty and sick as Rampo accused him of his suspicions towards Dazai's dad. But the fact Rampo shared them was even worse. He bit on his thumbnail, then shook his head. Hold on, what even brought this on? What's thrown you into such a fuss now of all times? Rampo blinked a few times, looking confused. Have you not noticed? He asked, tilting his head. Obviously not if I'm asking. CHUUYA responded with irritation. Rampo rolled his eyes at CHUUYA's tone, but explained anyway. He's not let a single person touch him all day, to the point he was noticeably jumping out of the way of people. The only time he did was Kinikida, who held his arm to pull him out of the way of those new transfer students coming down the hall. One of them is blind, and Dazai was right in the way of his cane. And Dazai looked like he might have thrown up. CHUUYA frowned. He had no problem with me touching him earlier. In fact, he hugged me first, and we were holding hands when we walked to school too. I didn't realize that could have been an issue. Rampo blinked a few times, then sighed, not annoyed, but not amused either. Of course he was letting you touch him. You're not the same as me or Kunikida. What's that supposed to mean? CHUUYA asked quickly, getting defensive. It's supposed to mean that you're obviously... Rampo cut himself off, then cleared his throat. You're friends in a way that's slightly different to everyone else. Kind of like how Kunikida and Yosano are friends. CHUUYA raised his eyebrow, but let it drop and sighed. Okay, the point being, he's more jumpy and skittish than usual, and you think his dad has done something. He asked for confirmation. Rampo nodded. I need you to keep an eye on things, because I have a really bad feeling. Just, if something happens, tell me. Rampo said, standing up again. CHUUYA didn't like this, the responsibility of having to look out for Dazai, when he wasn't sure what he was looking out for, or how to know. But he wasn't going to not. How could he? That's his best friend, above all else. Okay, he agreed, and Rampo sighed. Then, Rampo produced 2 lollipops out of nowhere, threw one at CHUUYA, and walked away. CHUUYA sat down with the lollipop, slightly bewildered, but he sighed, and just put it with his lunch, and ran a hand through his hair. This was so complicating, and so upsetting, and he was so lost. There was nothing to be done, yet everything could be done, and he didn't know anything. But he was supposed to know everything, apparently. He put his head in his hands. This was already a long day. Dazai had went straight home after school. Reluctantly, CHUUYA had informed Koyo and his parents of the news about Oda. Koyo had retreated to her room. She hadn't left for a few hours. His parents had lit a candle and set it next to a picture of a smiling young Koyo and Oda, being left to burn out. CHUUYA stood in his room, thumb hovering over the dial button for Dazai's number. With a shaky breath, he pressed the button and placed it to his ear. Within 2 rings, it was picked up, Dazai's voice hoarse and quiet on the other end. CHUUYA, what's up? Dazai asked, sounding a little tired. Why didn't you tell me? CHUUYA asked right away, knowing he'd never bring it up if he didn't get straight into it. Tell you what? Dazai asked, suddenly sounding a lot clearer. About Oda. CHUUYA responded, clearing his throat. You didn't tell me he died. There was a sharp inhale of breath from the other side, and Dazai scrambled for an explanation. It was sudden, and I just didn't know how to say it, and you're so busy with your soul... Dazai, shut up! CHUUYA snapped, voice hurt and angry. I'm sorry, Dazai said, voice panicked. No, God, Dazai. CHUUYA groaned, rubbing his face. Stop. I don't care. Just, I'm sorry about your brother. I'm so sorry. I know how much he meant to you. CHUUYA said, trying to keep his voice as comforting as possible. This was not the time to be upset at Dazai. It was Dazai's brother. But that didn't stop the feeling of betrayal at not being told, at being lied to. Dazai was quiet for a moment before he spoke. I can hear it in your voice. You do care, because I didn't tell you. Dazai accused. CHUUYA sighed, but decided to be honest. Yeah, you know what? I do care. I mentioned Oda a few times, and you never thought to mention the fact that he passed. I asked if you were alright, and you said you were, despite the fact your older brother died. You didn't invite me, or more importantly, my sister, who used to be one of his best friends, to the funeral. I'm pretty upset. Not to mention the fact that suddenly I'm being made aware of the fact that someone that I once upon a time looked up to has died. I do care, because you seem not to. I'm sorry your brother died. I really am. You should have told me, instead of hiding it from everyone you know as though it wouldn't be found out eventually. When CHUUYA finished, he was breathing heavily and tears were pricking in his eyes. But he stood his guard until Dazai spoke softly. I'm sorry, he said quietly. CHUUYA took a shaky breath and shook his head, despite the fact Dazai couldn't see it. Don't be. It's too late now. He was your brother. I'm sorry he died. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you couldn't tell me. It was quiet for a few seconds until Dazai spoke again. Was that all you wanted? Yeah, CHUUYA admitted, standing awkwardly in the center of the room, in his pajamas, with toothpaste still on his tongue. He had been getting ready for bed before he called. Are you okay? He asked, voice quiet. Please be honest. Dazai sighed, long and slow, and then answered. I mean, not really, but I'm getting over it. Dazai said with a resigned tone to his voice. CHUUYA swallowed and nodded. Okay, that's good, I guess. Should I go now? Dazai asked tiredly. No, CHUUYA decided, turning off his light and climbing into bed. You're sleeping on call with me. Dazai scoffed as CHUUYA put his phone on his bedside table, plugging it to charge. You're such a demanding doggy. Dazai grumbled, and CHUUYA ignored him. It's your turn to tell a story, CHUUYA said, settling under his covers and stretching a little. Dazai groaned, but after a second pause, he started speaking. In a distant universe, jumping through timelines, there was a man with hair like fire and eyes like sapphire, and he was powerful. Is this supposed to be me? CHUUYA interrupted with a yawn, feeling tired after the horrid night prior. Just listen. Dazai whined, and CHUUYA scoffed at his tone, but was quiet. The man had a superpower, a special ability like no other. The ability to control gravity. He could fly. He could make other people fly and change the weight of the objects near to him. CHUUYA hummed. He quite liked the sound of that. He'd never be scared of heights like that. This story sounds awfully familiar, he commented, fighting off tired eyes. Shh, was all Dazai responded with. He had a superpower so powerful that he was one of the most successful criminals in the world. He was a leader in a mafia, with a detective rival. He and the detective rival had been partners years before, but they split after a series of unfortunate events. CHUUYA raised an eyebrow at the criminal bit, but he was so tired. He just let his eyes fall close, listening to Dazai speak. They worked together closely for years until the split, and when they reunited, it was like nothing had changed. They worked together as before, only this time an understanding had been reached, that regardless of anything, they could trust the other, that things would always work out in the end. Dazai paused in his storytelling, curling up tighter on himself, listening closely, and then a faint snore came from the other side of the line, and he smiled a little, listening to the small sounds. Sleep well, CHUUYA, he whispered, pressing the button to hang up. Then he sat up, grabbing his first aid kit and going to his mirror, pulling off the blanket covering the glass. He had wounds to keep clean. Saturday afternoon, and CHUUYA was poring over a poem, wanting to tear his hair out. Next to him were two carefully wrapped presents, using the same constellation wrapping paper Daza had gone insane over the past 2 years. Little details CHUUYA held on to that should have made him realize he loved Dazai long before he did. On top of the two presents was an envelope, a slight bulk in the paper he smiled at knowingly. Then he looked back at the poem and wanted to bash his head down on the table. Moving his head into his hands, CHUUYA took a deep breath before picking up his phone, pinging a message to a very specific group chat. Fish viewers. Slug. You all bought your tickets, right? Ren. Who do you think we are? Kinikida. I ensured that everyone did that a few days ago. All tickets have been bought and transportation had been arranged. Slug. You lot are lifesavers. That said, if Dazai finds out I arranged this, y'all are gonna be blocked. This is a surprise, and y'all know he will be asking about it. Shut the fuck up. Nobody spill unless you like having your lives ruined. Missy. Wow, he's even spelling everything correctly. Slug. I hate you, Yosano! Ren. Spoke too soon, Lo. Now, CHUUYA is a lot of things, but one thing he refuses to be, at least when it came to Dazai, was a loser. Therefore, this specific bit for Dazai's birthday, this had been planned for weeks. So CHUUYA backed out the chat and opened his messages with Dazai, grinning as he typed it out. 9:23. Oi, why the fuck did you hang up? You snore. 15:37. Bus station, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring your camera and a jacket. Look nice. What? What's happening? Why? Just be there. Okay. Why? Smiley face. CHUUYA smiled and turned, looking at the outfit he had picked for the next day, then glancing back at Dazai's presents. Despite everything, he was determined to make tomorrow a good day. He turned back to the poem, groaning loudly again. This was agonizing, however. Still, he picked up his pen, reworking the words for the 100th time. I get you, Rompo. I truly get you. These oblivious idiots are gonna be the death of me as well. And oh my gosh, the way I was screaming at CHUUYA to give Dazai a break. Please. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, YouTube community tabs are now open for you to post, aside from Tumblr. And if you'd like to show more support or check out the monthly schedule, click the link through Ko-fi. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.